In the evening, the main character returned home after a hard day. She managed to earn some money, but she was never able to pay off her debts after her parents died. For this, she had to give up university and try to work on several part-time jobs. To distract herself from sad thoughts, Roxy read romantic stories about beauties and princes. The last of the ebooks was a novel about the young Duchess Charlotte, who had a bitchy character and was considered the scourge of the entire family. The beauty managed to marry the only heir of the most powerful family of the empire, Edward Gordon, a master swordsman who had never lost a single battle. 3 years after the wedding, unable to bear his wife's unbearable character, the young duke offered her a huge sum for a divorce. As expected, the aristocrat created a real scandal. The beauty's insidious actions, one of which was an attempt on the life of the novel's main character, led her to the scaffold. The book was coming to an end. Roxy was enthusiastically scrolling through pages on her phone, completely stopping looking around. At the last second, the girl noticed the flashing green traffic light and ran across the road, hoping to make it across the street. The main character did not pay attention to the fact that it was the last second. The huge truck had already started moving. A last thought flashed through Roxy's mind, that she had been hit by a car. Then everything went dark. The girl could not determine how long she had been unconscious. Suddenly, a strip of light flashed. She was standing in front of a mirror. From there, a beauty with luxurious hair was looking at her. Roxy had a fleeting thought that she had inhabited the body of the very same villainess from the last novel. The main character woke up from a loud voice, repeatedly repeating Charlotte's name. She was in a luxurious hall at a table. The handsome, stately man sitting opposite was handing the girl a piece of paper covered in small handwriting. It was Edward, the same duke who lost only one battle, and that was to his wife. Roxy finally believed in her transformation. After the accident with the truck, she had no chance of salvation. Now she had a chance. She became a noble aristocrat. The main character still couldn't come to her senses, distractedly listening to the young man next to her. The palace owner's offer of compensation, in the amount of 5 million gold coins, for a divorce and the return of her family name, shocked the girl even more. The young Duchess of Gordon mentally counted the money and already began to plan where she would spend it. Charlotte happily agreed to sign the divorce agreement. The main character signed. Edward was surprised by his wife's obedience. He expected loud scenes and scandals, as she usually did in any situation. The girl stood up from the table and walked with a flying gait towards the exit, smiling goodbye. The Duke could not believe that it was so easy to persuade his wife. He had never seen her so radiant and silent. Charlotte waved goodbye and disappeared through the door. For the first time, Edward thought that he didn't know his chosen one at all. The aristocrat went down to the gate. The butler was already waiting for her instructions. The first thing Roxy decided to do was go to her family estate, the Joneses, to correct the mistakes of the previous heroine, which she knew about from the book. Charlotte was the second child in a loving family. Her mother was the most beautiful, kind, and sympathetic lady in the area. After the birth of the girl, after some time, the state of the duchy began to gradually deteriorate. Perhaps for this reason, the little one was nicknamed the Joneses' Trouble. Although she fought to be loved, evil tongues constantly whispered behind the little lady's back that she was an ominous sign for the entire family. But gradually the girl resigned herself and gave up trying to love. The only man who was able to melt the heart of the young noblewoman a little was Edward Gordon, who became her husband, but unfortunately, the marriage was short-lived. Now the new Charlotte was returning to her mansion. Knowing the mistakes of her predecessor, the girl was going to lift the curse of the family and change the fate of the duchy. The main character remembered that her predecessor had tried to poison her friend, whom she considered a competitor, for which she was sentenced to the guillotine, and she was not going to repeat such actions so as not to die at the hands of the executioner. The carriage entered the courtyard of a huge estate. Just at this time, the owner of the mansion, Duke William Jones, was working in his office. The head butler, Thomas, reported the latest market news to the master. The maid announced the arrival of Mrs. Gordon, the daughter of the head of the family. Father categorically refused to accept Charlotte. The maid reported that the young lady insisted on the meeting and had no intention of leaving the estate. Impudence was one of the Duchess's traits, so the answer did not surprise the head of the family. William sent word through the maid that his daughter should be expecting him. Several hours passed. The main financial issues were discussed. It was time to take a break. Carried away, the owner of the mansion completely forgot about the visitor. Thomas reminded the gentleman that a young lady was waiting for him outside the door. All this time, the main character stood in a huge hall without chairs, where there was nowhere to sit. Charlotte was very tired, despite the fact that she had guessed about such a reception. The girl was ready to wait. She needed to show her confidence. Thanks to the information from the novel, she knew how her family went bankrupt and was ready to fix the situation. The father entered the living room. He saw his daughter so patient for the first time and asked the purpose of her visit. Charlotte convinced him to listen to her. She had only one request. In the empire, women did not have the right to vote, so the consent of the husband and father was necessary for divorce. Mrs. Gordon stated the main reason for the visit, which was to obtain permission to dissolve the marriage. The Duke did not understand why Rose wanted a divorce, because just 3 years ago she was going crazy about her chosen one. The head of the family was very surprised by his daughter's request. Everyone in the area did not hide their joy, hoping that the Joneses' misfortune would leave the estate forever after the wedding. When Charlotte left her home, she promised never to return. Finally, the heiress stole the family seal. The owner of the mansion did not understand why, after only 3 years, the Duchess returned and was now asking for permission for a divorce. The girl convinced her father that she had changed a lot during her absence, and she asked to make a deal. William was interested in his daughter's proposal. The Duchess promised that in the event of a divorce, she would be able to help revive the family estate and resolve the Joneses' financial problems within a year. Charlotte vowed on her family that she would make things right. Old Thomas, standing behind the gentleman, noted that the young lady had not changed at all. She still had the same groundless confidence and courage as before. But the owner of the mansion ordered that the girl be taken to her room. The butler was surprised by the gentleman's instructions and tried to dissuade him. William's look changed Thomas's mind. He bowed to his mistress and invited her to follow him. Charlotte couldn't believe she was back in her father's house, and she spent the night restlessly. It was time to change the fate of the family estate. In her past life, Roxy worked hard to pay off her housing debt. Suddenly, a chance to live a second life appeared. Such luck will not happen again. It was impossible to miss a lucky chance, so as not to die again, this time by the guillotine. Roxy knew she had to act differently than her predecessor in the novel, and she hoped she could handle it easily. The next morning, during breakfast, the head butler asked the Duke why he had agreed to his daughter's terms. William saw that Charlotte had changed. She was patiently waiting for the meeting. Previously, the girl would have smashed all the dishes and furniture if she had been asked to wait. Usually, she would have broken everything that came to hand. The Duke decided to give his daughter one last chance. The sun was shining brightly through the window. It was time to get up. The maids had already prepared warm water with fragrant flower petals. The young lady undressed and handed her nightclothes to her personal maid Emma. The maid accidentally touched her mistress's hand and was very scared. Usually in such cases, severe punishment was provided, up to and including the death penalty. The unfortunate woman begged the noblewoman on her knees to forgive her. This time, Charlotte climbed into the bath and smiled, not paying attention to the terrible offense. Emma quickly ran out the door. She couldn't believe her luck. The main character looked at her reflection in the water, not understanding why she caused fear and disgust in everyone. The girl decided that it would be better if she smiled more often, and after a while she left the room to the maids, who were curiously looking at the local press. The newsbook fell from the hands of the stunned workers. They had never seen the young owner with a smile on her face. The girl picked up a small magazine. The cover immediately caught her attention. It spoke about the upcoming divorce of two famous people. An exclusive report stated that the empire's main character, the swordmaster, the only heir to the most powerful family, was in the process of divorce. Charlotte's marriage to Edward resembled the military action he was trying to end. All readers were interested in the question of who would take the vacant place of the young duke's chosen one. The girl herself was a little upset by the way the secret information was presented. However, the disappointment did not last long. The maid brought a letter for the mistress. The main character was surprised by the news. She believed that her predecessor had no friends at all, due to her bad character. The envelope bore a seal bearing the Gordon family crest. A small piece of paper fell out of the opened letter. Charlotte couldn't believe her eyes. She had a check for 1,000,000 gold coins in her hands, and a note from her husband that it was the down payment of the divorce settlement. The main character's mood improved significantly. It was time to start the plan to restore the family line, and she asked Emma to bring outerwear with a cape to go to the city. The girl's first target was the market building where auctions of valuables were held. On this day, there was to be an auction of rare items, including artifacts and medicinal potions, including those of magical origin. For the first time, a potion called Tears of the Wind was put on sale, which could remove curses and bring seriously ill people back to life. Charlotte was glad she made it to the auction. She wanted to help her older brother Marcel, who had been in a coma for several years. The Duchess was glad that she had a large sum of money on hand. The young lady hoped that not only would she be able to easily acquire the potion, but she would also be able to spend the remaining coins on various delicious things. A masked stranger disrupted all the main characters' plans. The young man waged a stubborn fight to redeem the magic potion. Charlotte had to bet the entire million to win. After some difficult bargaining, the bottle of Tears of the Wind was in the hands of the Duchess. After the auction, the beauty was returning to the mansion to immediately test the purchase when she heard footsteps behind her. The girl looked back and saw the same stranger who was in the market hall. The masked man offered the young noblewoman 5,000,000 in exchange for the bottle, doubting that she knew its purpose. Charlotte was outraged by the behavior of the unknown man. She could not understand why, despite the huge sum of money, he did not bargain to the bitter end. The main character persistently defended her right to the potion. The stranger looked closely at his interlocutor. The girl knew exactly what the item was for, saying that she needed it to help a family member. The young aristocrat's gaze was determined. Suddenly, the young man's eyes darkened, and he thought with horror that another attack, which was the curse of the family, had overtaken him again. Charlotte floated before the young man's eyes, gradually becoming enveloped in a red haze. The main character noticed that the look under the white mask was clouded. Sweat was streaming down his face, and it seemed to her that her interlocutor was about to fall. The stranger held on with all his might. Outside the gates, a carriage was already waiting for the lady to take her to the mansion. The girl offered the stranger a handkerchief. Charlotte couldn't understand what was happening to her interlocutor. The young man refused to help, but the main character insisted, persistently holding out her hand with a small piece of cloth. The stranger didn't have time to dodge. The girl gently wiped the sweat from his face. Something unexpected happened. The young man felt that the painful attack had stopped, leaving the handkerchief in the unknown man's hand and promising to return for it later. Charlotte waved her hand goodbye and ran off to the carriage. Only now could Edward take off his mask. He had never seen his wife so kind. Duke William was once again sitting in his study, writing reports. Suddenly, the maid ran into the room to say that the young lady was not listening to her stepmother and wanted to go to her brother's bedroom. The head of the family was angry, regretting his decision to let his daughter back into the house. The owner of the mansion ran to help. A terrible event happened in the family many years ago, and since then, the duchy has been haunted by misfortune. Little Charlotte broke a branch of the fairy tree in the garden, which was considered the ancient patron of the entire family. The angry fairy placed a curse on the culprit of the tragedy. The entire Jones family suffered. except for the girl, consisting of the head of the family, William, his beautiful wife Elizabeth, and his eldest son Marcel. Charlotte's brother went into a coma for several years, as if he were asleep all the time. The mother tried to protect her daughter and covered her with her body. The Duchess managed to take the curse upon herself. Elizabeth was very kind and always helped those in need. She acted as a fair judge throughout the duchy. People loved and respected her. At that moment she was pregnant. From shock she went into premature labor. Mother and child died. Little Charlotte survived, but lost her memory from the shock. And from then on, everyone began to call her the Joneses' trouble and turn away from her. The only witness to what happened was Tiffany, the mistress's personal maid, who told everyone about what happened. A few years after his wife's death, William married his former maid, who had devotedly and carefully looked after Marcel all these years. Now the stepmother was demanding that her stepdaughter give her the suspicious potion. The young lady tried to convince Tiffany that she wanted to help her brother. The father, enraged by his daughter's actions, burst into the room. The former maid tried to explain the situation to the Duke. For several years after the curse, Marcel was in an eternal sleep. Charlotte told her father about a magical medicine called Tears of the Wind. The magic potion had the ability to remove curses and restore the health of the sick. Tiffany didn't want to believe the young lady's words. The main character had to lie that she learned the information from the secret library of the Gordon family, since she had a lot of time to study new things. Being alone, she could not say that she read about the potion in the novel. William knew that his daughter always got what she wanted, so he believed her. The father allowed the girl to approach her brother's bed. Charlotte was very worried about the young man. She had to save him from the curse. Marcel lay on a large soft pillow, looking as if he had just fallen asleep. The main character was worried that the potion might not work. The girl opened the bottle and poured the liquid into her older brother's mouth. Time seemed to stand still. Nothing happened. Charlotte anxiously watched Marcel's condition. Suddenly, the young man opened his eyes and extended his hand to his sister, surprised at how much she had grown up. Those present watched what was happening with joyful surprise. However, the awakening was very short. The heir quickly closed his eyes and fell asleep again. Charlotte vowed to her brother that she would do everything she could to make him wake up as quickly as possible. William watched his daughter thoughtfully, noting how she had changed in recent times, her words about loneliness having sunk into his soul. Only Tiffany left the young man's bedroom with a displeased look. She did not like her stepdaughter's words and the Duke's defense at all. The head of the family sat with his daughter in the living room over a cup of tea. He offered her any gift and was ready to fulfill any of her wishes. Charlotte was surprised. She didn't need any reward. She just did what she could. At parting, the young lady asked her father to spend more time with Marcel, despite his workload. William was once again surprised by the change in his youngest daughter's character. The head of the family noticed that the young lady began to take the maid's mistakes calmly, without scolding them for their mistakes. The girl smiled often and no longer yelled at the maids. The owner of the mansion hoped that life in the Gordon family had made the young Duchess smarter and more able to assess situations differently. The head of the family was touched by his daughter's promise to help her brother, but the words about 3 years of loneliness haunted him. Tiffany was very concerned about Charlotte's return. Her father was going to give her permission for a divorce soon, officially returning her status, rights, and surname. The mistress's former maid began to make new plans to get rid of the entire family. To vent her anger, the current owner of the mansion disciplined her subordinates with a whip. The next day, William informed his daughter of his decision to end the marriage. The girl could not believe that she would soon again bear the surname Jones. She thanked the head of the family, hugging him for the first time in a long time, and calling him father. This was another step towards freedom. But in this world there was an order, according to which, after the first divorce, all property returns to the girl's house. But the second husband takes it as compensation for the remarriage. The main character thought about where to get a lot of money to buy a title and independence. Finding herself alone in her bedroom, Charlotte saw a screen that informed her that the level was completed. She had collected the necessary bonuses and fate energy, and also acquired new abilities. This reminded her of Roxy's past life and the fantasy quests that she really enjoyed. The novel featured the main character, Kate, who was repeatedly targeted by an evil aristocrat. In one of the chapters, the insidious Duchess brought her friend to an abandoned mine that was given to her as a child. Now the former mines have been handed over to the lucky Kate. The most valuable thing in the mine was the Lake of Purification, which was believed to be endowed with the power of fairies. Envious Charlotte brought her friend specifically to drown her beautiful competitor without witnesses. Getting out of the water was almost impossible, given the low temperature and the high probability of death from hypothermia, which is what the Duchess was counting on. However, the status of the main character of the novel did its job. Kate safely sank to the bottom of the blue lake and collected a large number of magic stones. The meeting with the prince in the subsequent sections of the book prepared a happy ending for the beauty and death for the envious woman. It was the future heir to the throne who noticed the connection between Kate's troubles and Charlotte's actions. This is how events unfolded in the novel. But now Roxy is determined to avoid bad deeds in order to stay alive. The girl found a mine with a lake and was ready to dive for treasure, as described on the pages of the book. Just after jumping into the water, the main character thought for a second, what if the miracle was only in the text, and in reality she would not be able to get out? But it was already too late. One of the city's famous places was the shadowy Brooklyn Information Guild, where you could get an answer to any question. The head of the organization was Edward Gordon. He always hid his face under a mask, so no one knew about it. Another secret of the powerful family was the curse of madness, which was passed down from generation to generation. When a person's body seemed to be in chains and was torn to pieces, the next attack happened suddenly. The young servant Bob watched in horror as his master suffered. After the exacerbation had passed, the Duke inquired about the results of the examination of the scarf. The young man reported that all sorts of magicians and wizards found nothing in the material. It was an ordinary piece of fabric. Edward couldn't believe it, because it was precisely thanks to the touch of a small handkerchief that he instantly got over the attack that all the healers in the world could not relieve. The young man tried to understand what his wife had done with the ordinary fabric. The Duke applied the material to his head and recalled his last meeting with Charlotte. Each time the madness began unexpectedly. First the heart seemed to freeze, then it suddenly heated up, as if tearing the body apart. The pain was unbearable. Neither the light nor the dark forces were able to find a cure for the curse. An ordinary handkerchief in the girl's hands easily dealt with the attack. To Edward, his wife was a leech woman who used her powerful family name to gain power over people. At the moment of their last meeting, Mrs. Gordon looked completely different. Her eyes were mysterious and radiated warmth. The butler interrupted the gentleman's thoughts by informing him that Charlotte was in the drawing room. The Duke was very surprised, put on a mask, and went out to greet the unexpected guest. The lady sat modestly on the sofa in an unusual pantsuit and smiled. The guild master was interested in the purpose of the noble lady's visit. The girl asked to return her scarf and said that she was currently trying to create the foundation for a bright future life. Edward remembered the events of 2 years ago. At that time, he was on a campaign on the border of the empire, and a difficult battle was ahead in the morning. The squire delivered an urgent letter from the estate, which reported that the young duchess was dying. Despite the wedding, they practically did not know each other. Having traveled a long way, the Duke arrived at the mansion late at night. Despite the time, voices could be heard from all sides. Secretly approaching closer, the owner of the palace saw crowds of servants running along numerous corridors, carrying out the instructions of the mistress. Charlotte herself stood in the center of the room, giving orders in a dissatisfied voice. Having made sure that his wife was alive and well, Edward got ready to leave. The wife felt her husband's presence and called out to him. The young lady did not hide the fact that she sent the letter in the hope that her lover would return to her. The girl wasn't interested in the situation on the battlefield. She just wanted attention to herself. The chance was small, but it worked. Angered at being trapped, Edward set out again. However, Charlotte did not want to let her husband go. She seemed to hypnotize him with her words, suggesting that he rest and go to bed. The quiet, calm phrases had an effect on the owner of the mansion, and he fell asleep. Morning came. The palace was bathed in the sun's rays. A frightened Edward jumped out of bed, not understanding what had happened or how he had been able to fall asleep. The small, fragile Duchess lay nearby, covered with a blanket, her even breathing indicating that she was sleeping. The young man had a strong desire to kill the unbearable, selfish woman, and his hands reached out to her thin neck. Edward held back. It was time to urgently return to the field camp. The owner of the mansion quickly got dressed and quietly left the bedroom. Having jumped on his horse, the Duke set off on his journey. He did not notice how the sad gaze of a girl followed him from the balcony. Charlotte was left alone again, in a huge mansion among many unfamiliar faces. The guest's voice distracted Edward from his memories. She again reminded him of the handkerchief. From the book, the main character knew how to find the guild building, where she could access various information. The plan was conceived several days ago, and it was necessary to begin implementing it. The description of the location was accurate. It remained to be hoped that the head of the organization would be on site. So far, everything was going well. But suddenly the master announced that he currently did not have a scarf. The main character was surprised by the message, assuming that the masked stranger had simply thrown it away. Indignant, the girl said that this was her husband's only gift. The handkerchief was very ordinary, without embroidery. Edward could not remember when he could have given it to his wife, and asked the guest to tell him the details. The guest reminded that collecting information was the responsibility of the guild, on which she had placed great hopes. It became clear to the master that the purpose of the visit was something completely different than returning a piece of fabric. The head of the organization offered the young lady compensation in the form of Brooklyn services. The main character pretended to reluctantly agree to the compromise and sat down in the chair of desires. The result was not long in coming. The aristocrat needed money and a new title to get a divorce and protect herself from remarriage. Even at the auction, the girl saw a white mask. From the book, she knew that it belonged to the master of the large information guild Brooklyn, which is capable of many things, and planned the meeting in advance. A high-class organization had enormous potential, but there was a risk of getting a refusal for one or another request. Then no amount of money could change the situation. Charlotte was distracted by the mask, and a man's voice made her flinch. Out of surprise, the cup of tea jumped out of the main character's hands and fell to the floor, breaking into small pieces. The girl managed to jump to the side and fall into the hands of the head of the guild. The main character's eyes met the interested gaze of the mask's owner. Hearing the ringing, the butler ran into the office. The master asked to remove the broken dishes and bring a list of titles and documents for obtaining a different name. The guild's services were expensive, so the head of Brooklyn inquired about the fee. The Duchess was ready to pay. She had not spent her time at the bottom of the lake in an abandoned underground mine in vain, so the deal took place. On the way back, the main character went into a small cozy cafe to sum up the meeting. The novel didn't give any information about the guild master himself, why he wears a mask, or who he really is. Forcing herself to distract herself from memories of the pleasant young man, Charlotte analyzed her first successes. The next level opened up in the main character's internal status. Now she had the ability to summon objects without yet understanding what that meant. The young lady involuntarily overheard loud conversations at the next table. Several aristocrats were discussing gossip about the divorce of their idol, Duke Edward. The girls laughed at the unsuccessful marriage of William Jones's youngest daughter. Only one of the noblewomen sat with a sad look. Charlotte got the impression that the strangers had deliberately started a conversation when they saw her and hoped for a new scandal. The novel's previous heroine would have long ago doused her offenders with wine from her glass. The young Duchess suddenly wanted to repeat her prank. Lauren, as the fair-haired girl was called, considered herself Edward's bride, whose betrothed had been stolen. The red-haired beauty Helen reassured her. Now the chance to marry the Duke appeared again. Charlotte tried to calm down and finish her tea. Helen began to discuss Mrs. Gordon's inappropriate behavior, even louder, pretending not to notice her presence. Lauren tried to calm her friend down. Finally, Charlotte couldn't stand it any longer and approached the noisy group. The main character tried to find out whether one of the aristocrats was really the Duke's bride. The girl calmly put Helen aside, who had recently called her the Joneses' misfortune again. She was interested in the facts. Lauren was frightened by Edward's wife's direct questions. The decision about her engagement turned out to be another gossip to attract attention. Charlotte was about to leave, convinced that the accusations were unjust, when the aristocrat remembered that 4 years ago, the Gordon family had stayed at their estate for one day. The Duke then suggested that he might consider the possibility of an engagement, so Lauren was deliberately spreading false information about her fiancé. The noblewoman did not like being exposed in front of her friends, and she took a swing at the uninvited guest. The main character grabbed his hand, upset that she couldn't contain her anger. Having calmed the offenders, the girl left the cafe sadly. After walking a few steps, the main character encountered the master of the Brooklyn Guild. The head of the organization seemed to be nearby by chance. He prepared the final agreement. Hearing loud voices, the owner of the mask was about to enter the cafe. Charlotte managed to stop him with difficulty, asking him to accompany her home. The companion set off towards the Jones mansion, where the young man was heading, discussing the first results of their negotiations along the way. The young man gallantly supported his companion. The main character began to suspect that the master liked her. However, the stranger's goal was completely different. He tried to feel the presence of magic or special skills in the girl, but the result was negative. The master refused to call Charlotte by her former name, citing the lack of final divorce proceedings, leaving her further upset. Trying not to be distracted, the main character decided not to pay attention to the master and consider him simply a business partner. The familiar smell of fried meat interested the girl. The head of the guild guessed the interlocutor's thoughts and brought pieces of shashlik. Before the main character had time to enjoy the taste of long-forgotten delicacies, fresh fruit juice was already waiting for her. The strange sculpture caught the girl's eye, and she bought it along with various fruits that she saw for the first time. The master tried to treat his interlocutor with unfamiliar delicacies. Charlotte was frightened by her fellow traveler's kindness. After parting, she forced herself to think only about business. It was necessary to try new abilities, and the main character remembered the main symbol of this world. It was a rose, present in everything, from perfume to the hairstyle of noble beauties. No other objects were available for witchcraft, so the girl decided to summon a luxurious flower. The result was not long in coming. A modest bud with a stem lay in front of the main character. It unexpectedly turned out that the beautiful flower was artificial. Duke Jones was once again spending time in his study with his old assistant. The mansion was surprisingly quiet. Thomas had not noticed any strange behavior from the young lady lately. Charlotte entered her father's office, uninvited, and asked to discuss a number of issues. The girl reminded the head of the family about his birthday. She had never spoken about this before. The Duke received a gold pen and inkwell as a souvenir. When his daughter left, William wondered if he deserved such attention from his child. The owner of the estate recalled his attitude towards Charlotte. After the death of his wife, he was not an ideal father and often turned away from her. William's thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of the maid. The maid reported that the young lady had come to her mother's apartment with a large bouquet. The new owner of the mansion gave the workers instructions not to let anyone into the Duchess's room. The main character could not understand why she could not enter her mother's room, who loved flowers very much, and decorate it with roses. Charlotte realized that the head maid was stalling for time, waiting for the head of the family to help, knowing that the young mistress had no power in her own house. The Duke did not keep us waiting. He was already running into the living room. To the surprise of the servants, William grabbed his daughter. The bouquet fell from her hands. He anxiously asked the girl about her health and did not scold her at all. In fact, the purpose of visiting Elizabeth's room was not to decorate the room, but to have a romance, thanks to which Roxy from a past life got into another world. The main character hoped that she would find in the book the key to solving all the family's problems and her past mistakes. The main character of the novel was Kate, who was envied and constantly harmed by Charlotte. One day, the evil aristocrat sent her rival a letter, informing her that she was in danger, and the girl immediately arrived at the mansion. The hostess was glad to meet her and led her friend into the house. Charlotte apologized for what happened in the mine, citing the fact that the discovery of the magic stones was not accidental, and offered to show her mansion. The main character brought her friend to the room of her mother, who died from a fairy curse several years ago, where entry was prohibited. In fact, the young mistress of the estate was planning revenge again, upset that her first attempt to get rid of Kate in the lake had failed. The unfortunate victim was thrown onto a sculpture of an angel with wings that stood in Elizabeth's apartment. Charlotte hoped that something irreparable would happen and ran out of the room. The cunning girl called her father to complain about the inadequate behavior of her friend, who entered a forbidden place without permission and caused a pogrom there. Before the Duke had time to reach his first wife's bedroom, a golden glow appeared from behind the door. Kate appeared on the threshold, not remembering what had happened, holding a golden egg in her hands. Suddenly, the object flashed with a bright light, illuminating the girl. William couldn't believe the miracle. It was a fairy sign that was a family heirloom and was thought to have disappeared after the death of his wife. The artifact has chosen its new owner. Obtaining information about this treasure was the real reason for the reincarnated Charlotte to visit the room of the deceased Duchess, along with the fact that the beautiful flower was considered the main symbol of the empire. The curse of the rose was widespread among the inhabitants. It was believed that a person could die by touching the plant. This is what William was afraid of when he heard from a servant about his daughter with a bouquet in her hands. This information was not in the novel, but it was one of the reasons why there were no flowers in Elizabeth's room. The head maid reported to the master about the behavior of his daughter, who tried to bring a dangerous bouquet to her mother's apartment. However, the owner of the estate was dissatisfied with the work of the servant, who did not monitor the safety of his daughter and allowed her to touch the roses, so he ordered the servant to be sent to prison as punishment. Charlotte began to collect the scattered bouquet. The girl reassured her worried father. The beautiful roses were not real and therefore could not cause harm. The main character needed to get into the room, so she asked permission to go into her mother's bedroom and decorate with flowers. William himself took his daughter to his beloved wife's apartment. Father and Charlotte stopped at a portrait of Elizabeth holding her baby. The statue of the angel stood in the same place. William and his daughter began to read old family manuscripts with great interest. The Duke left the girl alone in the room for a few minutes. There was enough time for the main character to carry out her plan. Left alone, Charlotte curiously opened the small box she found next to the sculpture. The girl found herself holding a family heirloom in her hands. It was a fairy sign. In the evening, the young lady managed to get rid of the maid and go out into the city alone. It started to rain. Charlotte really didn't like this kind of weather. Suddenly, the girl was protected from the drops by the wide cloak of the guildmaster. The owner of the mask was surprised to see a noblewoman walking alone down the street. The gentleman gallantly offered a carriage to take the beauty to the right place. The main character was glad to meet and did not refuse help. The girl asked to be taken to her husband's mansion. Edward, hidden from everyone by the mask of the guild master, was very surprised by Charlotte's decision. At the Gordons' estate, unpleasant news awaited the main character. The husband said that to notarize the divorce, he needed a check which he sent as a down payment. Charlotte spent the entire amount at the auction, paying for the tears of the wind, so she could not provide the necessary document, which cancelled the divorce procedure for an indefinite period. Edward refused to accept any other options for confirming his wife's consent to the dissolution of the marriage. As a virtual penalty for her failed attempt at divorce, the main character was forced to follow her fate, which upset her even more. After thinking for a while, the young Duchess went to the Information Guild for help. The master was surprised by the guest's late visit. Before telling about the purpose of the visit, the girl asked to treat her to some tea, since she had not had time to eat anything during the day. The owner of the organization was surprised by the request. There were few workers in the guild, so there was almost no food, but the guest was happy with an ordinary sandwich, shocking the young man with the simplicity of its preparation from food products found in the canteen. The master refused to try the prepared food. He was embarrassed by the complete lack of etiquette of a noblewoman making a sandwich with her own hands. A well-fed and satisfied Charlotte was ready to lay out her plan. Edward once again wondered if he knew his wife. It was the first time he had seen her so happy and smiling. In his opinion, a noble person should have overturned the table and smashed everything when she saw the food he had brought. The tea party was over. It was time to get down to business. Charlotte suggested to the master to organize a joint business. The guild leader was even more surprised. The main character opened her handbag to take out the subject of their future contract. The Duke saw the rose in his wife's hands with horror and became very frightened, immediately snatching it from the girl's hands. Edward knew that the curse of the ill-fated flower was also cast on Charlotte. He looked closely at the surprised beauty, fearing to see signs of deteriorating health. In fact, the plant was artificial, although it looked like the real thing and did not pose a death threat. The main character suggested organizing the production and sale of roses that would delight their customers without causing harm. The guild master quickly assessed the benefits and offered to sign a contract. A new day had dawned, and there was silence in the Jones palace. The rays of the sun woke Charlotte, who had fallen fast asleep late the previous evening after a hard day. None of the maids entered the bedroom, so the main character, in her night clothes, came out of her room. In the hall, the maids discussed the events of the previous days and the return of the young mistress, who was considered the scourge of the duchy. The arrest of the senior servant frightened the workers. The main character hid on the stairs and listened to the conversations of the maids. None of them wanted to go to her. Seeing the mistress, the maids ran away. Only Emma, who had always been with Charlotte before, remained under the grumbling of the worker. Dissatisfied with her appearance in pajamas, they went to the girl's apartment. The young aristocrat began to wonder who was behind the workers if they behaved freely with her, without even apologizing for their behavior. Recently, William's daughter had been having frequent dreams in which she was in an unknown place and was always scolding some stranger. The main character shared a nightmare with the maid, not understanding where and who she dreamed about. Suddenly, Charlotte decided to go for a walk. The young mistress refused to be accompanied and put on a cloak with a hood. The hostess said goodbye to Emma, promising to return for dinner. The girl had not managed to go far from the house before she again encountered the owner of the mask. Charlotte was surprised that she often met the master near her mansion. The head of the organization said that he wanted to discuss issues and invited the Duchess to go for a walk together. The partners went to the market to study the demand for a joint business. In order not to attract the attention of passers-by, the master pulled the hood up to his interlocutor's eyes. The partner advised the girl to stay close so as not to get lost in the crowd. It was evening, and the Jones mansion was quiet again after the usual hectic day. The former servant, who became the Duchess sometime after Elizabeth's death, was very unhappy with the situation. She was worried about Charlotte's return. which was disrupting all her dreams. Tiffany again began interrogating the maids, who were supposed to constantly monitor William's daughter and report all the information to her. Having secretly returned home, the main character witnessed another beating of the maids by her stepmother. The insidious owner of the mansion was glad that Marcel had not come to his senses. It was necessary to urgently change plans in order to quickly deal with all the members of the family. Tiffany wasn't afraid of the workers. She raised them with blood, so they didn't tell anyone about her actions. Charlotte saw with her own eyes that she was right and knows who is the main cause of the misfortunes on the estate. In the morning, the main character was basking in a warm bath, thinking about how to attract the maid to her side. Emma was the only one who tried to help the young mistress. The girl understood that she had a very strong rival, who also had access to poisons. After the death of the Duchess, her personal maid, through her devoted care of William's son, received a promotion to the position of mistress of the mansion. Tiffany was also the only witness to the incident who saved the children of the head of the family. It was the stepmother who made the most effort to blame Charlotte for all the troubles. It was necessary to stop being afraid and pull yourself together, preparing for battle. A strange event was the girl's invitation to a large tea party in a luxurious garden, which was organized by Tiffany. Arriving at the venue, Charlotte saw her stepmother. There was only one table, with drinks and sweets. The cunning woman told her stepdaughter that all the guests had refused to attend the meeting after learning that Trouble Jones would be among those invited. The main character was prepared for such a situation. She greeted Tiffany with a smile. The girl prepared a small gift. It was a vase with beautiful flowers. The Duchess pretended to be very touched by the attention. Sitting at the table, Charlotte asked the woman to tell her the details of the terrible events of her childhood. The new owner of the mansion was very surprised by the request and told the beauty not to take the bad words of those around her to heart, because she was very little at that time. The main character hugged her stepmother, thanking her for her understanding. The young lady continued to drag out time. She asked permission to call Tiffany mother in order to divert her attention to her investigations. The girl understood that the former maid was simply playing, despite the absence of an audience. The maid arrived and said that William was going to attend tea. The Duchess did not expect her husband's presence at all. The owner of the estate was extremely unhappy with the absence of guests who were afraid of his daughter and did not come to the meeting. He promised to deal with each of them. Tiffany poured tea for the head of the family and tried to calm him down. The main character smelled an unfamiliar aroma. The color was also different from usual and asked about the drink. The Duchess said that her father had recently had health problems, so she was preparing herbal infusions that made him feel better. Charlotte kindly declined the offer to try the tea, citing her dislike of medicine. Late at night in bed, the main character analyzed the situation, coming to the conclusion that there was poison in the teapot. The Duchess personally gave Marcel herbal infusions to drink, which is probably why the young man did not regain consciousness. The young Duchess could not figure out how to deal with her dangerous rival. Suddenly, Charlotte's gaze fell on an ancient artifact that was considered the protector of the family. The main character tried her best to persuade the family heirloom to help her. As if hearing the call, the golden egg cracked. The girl was blinded for a second by the bright light that poured from within. The main character's entire room was illuminated by a powerful glow. A little sorceress, with transparent thin wings, slept in the palms of the surprised beauty. Miranda finally stretched after a long sleep. Charlotte was shocked. She didn't expect to see a fairy at all. The little girl hugged her owner, scolding her for not waking her up earlier. The small transparent cloud expressed genuine joy at meeting the young lady. However, the main character remembered from the book that winged magicians are described as evil spirits, and it was the fairy who constantly advised her mistress to do bad things in the past, and constantly got her into trouble. The old Charlotte listened to her little friend and was sentenced to death as a result. The main character expected the artifact to become a secret weapon, but Miranda's appearance upset and frightened her. Not knowing what to do with the fairy, the young owner of the mansion decided to simply ignore her presence for now, since she does not know her true abilities, which can be dangerous. Fortunately, the baby was invisible to everyone else. The girl invited her father for a cup of tea to discuss several issues with him. Charlotte asked permission to hold a banquet, to which she wanted to invite distinguished guests and neighbors. The Duke liked his daughter's idea. He saw that she was trying to improve her relationships with those around her. William brought his drink, which his new wife constantly brewed for him. When Miranda flew closer, she was horrified. The girl decided to check the composition of the decoction that her father drinks. The fairy insisted that Charlotte forbid the owner of the mansion from consuming the dangerous liquid, identifying it as the poisonous herb Acarosia. The young lady complained that she had been feeling weak lately and asked the head of the family to share some medicinal herbs with her. William happily gave his daughter a bag of potion. The main character could not fully trust her little companion, considering the guild master to be her only assistant, and she went to him to determine the composition of the tea. The head of the information resource confirmed the fairy's words. It really was poison. The guild master was surprised where the beauty got the dangerous herb from. The decoction of the ancient plant seemed to energize it first, but in fact, it only poisoned the body if consumed for a long time. And when mixed with alcohol, it quickly led to cardiac arrest. Charlotte was upset that her worst fears had come true. The girl studied the conclusion and asked her interlocutor if there was an antidote. The owner of the mask denied Miranda's negative information. Such a plant was found and successfully helped in treatment. The main character was offended by the fairy who gave false information, but the winged baby heard about the antidote for the first time. Charlotte thanked the master for his help and presented him with a large set of various overseas herbs that her caring father had provided her with. The young duchess asked the head to give her a ticket to a gladiator fight. She knew from the book that the guild was involved in organizing them. Another slave battle was to take place in the coming days. The girl put on simple, nondescript clothes and a hooded cape and walked up to the stands. It was her first time visiting a gambling house. The main contender for victory was the merciless giant Joe, known for his cruelty. However, the main character was sure that she knew who would win in today's battles. It was a young unknown slave. 5 fights had already passed. Joe remained unharmed in all the fights. Spectators were placing bets on whether someone would be able to defeat the fierce opponent. The organizer of the fights offered a prize to anyone who guessed the hero of the day. A special gift was a healing crystal, which had the ability to save from a fatal wound. To get a magic item, it was necessary to guess which of the 9 remaining gladiators would defeat the giant, or there would be none that day. The main character made her bet. 3 more participants dropped out of the list. It was the turn of an unknown slave named Janus to fight. He was in this arena for the first time. From the very beginning of the fight, the stranger attacked the brute. The young man amazed the audience with his speed and agility. Just a few minutes later, the indestructible Joe lay helplessly on his shoulder blades. No one understood how the fragile fighter managed to do it. Janus looked closely at the faces of the visitors. The main character thought that their gazes crossed. Charlotte thought she knew the winner's real name. The young man was the only heir of the Duke's family and loved fighting, but many years ago he suddenly disappeared. Until now, no one knew if he was alive. The girl knew this information from the novel, according to which one day the main character will come and save the hero from gladiatorial fights. The young lady was afraid that her appearance at the fights might ruin the story with a happy ending, but she needed the prize. With the help of a magical object, the Duchess was going to help her brother wake up from his eternal sleep. Having received a special gift, Charlotte went home. When Miranda went outside, she noticed 3 suspicious guys following the girl. After some time, the men caught up with the main character. The impudent strangers demanded the return of the healing crystal. The Duchess understood that no one would give away a valuable item just like that. The girl offered her pursuers 3 times their previous fee to let her go. The robbers remained loyal to their master and demanded the crystal. Charlotte tried to stall for time, figuring out how to deceive the villains. Having managed to exchange glances with the fairy, the girl threw the priceless stone into the distance. The crystal flew high above the men's heads. Miranda managed to fly away a distance, but she was unable to hold on to the object, which was too heavy for her. The crystal fell into a small river that ran along the street. The robbers jumped into the water to find the missing item. Their lives depended on it. While the pursuers were diving, the main character managed to move to the other end of the street. The fairy saw where the crystal fell and tried with difficulty to get it out of the water. The task was almost impossible. To swim and fly with a heavy load was dangerous and very difficult. But Miranda wanted to prove her loyalty to her mistress. Charlotte hid around the corner and was already starting to worry. The little helper should have appeared long ago. The main character even doubted the fairy, upset that she trusted her. Luckily, a few seconds later, the Duchess saw a shiny stone flying right towards her. Miranda, with an unbearable load, fell right in front of her mistress. She was glad that she was able to fulfill the order and win her trust. Suddenly, the fairy grabbed the priceless prize with a frightened look. Someone's shadow blocked the street, preventing the main character from leaving. Charlotte was surprised to recognize the tall stranger as her husband. The guild master didn't have time to put on his mask when he felt worried about the girl who had bought a ticket to the gladiator fights and rushed towards the arena. The Duchess grabbed Edward by the hand. It was necessary to leave the dangerous place immediately. One of the robbers emerged from the water and saw the stranger trying to escape. The pursuer noticed that the girl was pulling the young man along with all her might. The fugitive needed to be apprehended, so the robber threw a dagger. Edward managed to cover his wife with his body, and the blade hit him in the back. The news quickly spread throughout the city, and after a while the maid reported to Tiffany that Charlotte, in a fit of anger, had stabbed her husband. The Duchess did not believe the rumors, but they made her laugh. In general, the former maid was not interested in court passions. She was going to sort out her own problems. Tiffany was preparing to finally take over the house. The doctor examined Edward. The wound was shallow and did not affect any internal organs. The Duke even managed to beat the robber well. The rest managed to escape. The healer advised the gentleman to limit his movements and rest. Charlotte was very scared at that moment, not understanding how her husband ended up nearby. Without him, she would not have been able to escape from her pursuers. The Duke thanked his wife for her support and advised her to go home. However, the main character was not going to listen to her husband. Charlotte knew Edward needed some rest, so she led him to the bedroom. The girl felt guilty because the injury was received because of her. The young man saw his wife so excited for the first time. The main character poured milk into a glass and handed it to the wounded man. Charlotte said she was trying to change. She was no longer the arrogant bitch he knew her to be. The girl asked her husband to help her work on herself and not to treat her rudely. Edward was not very pleased with the communication. He was interested in what he would get in return. The main character thought about it. She could only offer a quiet divorce without scandals and hysterics. It was time to leave the Duke's mansion and get ready to go home. Charlotte walked quietly into Marcel's room, where he had been sleeping for several years, despite the fairy's curse. The young lady looked at her older brother with concern. The bored Miranda happily hugged her owner, who thanked her for her help and now trusted her completely. The fairy flew up to the sleeping young man. She did not feel any traces of the curse. Rather, her relatives were trying to help the guy recover. However, poison entered Marcel's body through the IV drip. The dangerous substance poisoned the body of William's eldest son. Under the influence of such a herb, people usually died in agony. However, the patroness of the family tried to cleanse the poison, so the young man was asleep. Charlotte had high hopes for the healing crystal. To enhance the effect of the magic stone, Miranda offered her help. The maids reported to the mistress that the young lady visited her brother every day. Emma assumed that the young mistress wanted to impress her father. The main character was on good terms with the maid. She was very worried about her safety and asked her to tell about all the incidents with Tiffany in order to protect her from threats and beatings. The new Duchess knew that in a few days there would be a banquet organized by the young mistress, who probably decided to seize power in the estate. 5 years ago, the former maid became a duchess. Tiffany gained jewelry and power. However, William rejected her all the time. He could not forget his beloved wife, who was always the kindest and fairest mistress for everyone around her. Before the big banquet, Charlotte asked her father for a meeting. The young duchess warned the head of the family about the impending assassination attempt and asked him to help her. The solemn day, which seemed so far away, has arrived. There were a lot of guests, and they discussed the presence at the banquet of Mrs. Gordon herself, who was divorcing her husband. Tiffany's brother, Baron Stephen, arrived at the celebration in formal attire. The fat man smelled money and was ready to take the 5 million gold coins that the girl would get after the divorce. The Baron heard about the divorce and was ready to marry Charlotte. In the event of a second marriage, the husband would take the wife's entire dowry as compensation. However, the main character had no intention of getting married again, and the red wine from her glass ended up on the head of the impudent gentleman. The young duchess did not regret her actions at all. A bonus for Charlotte was the ability to obtain information through virtual requests. The Baron did not give up, offering to accompany the girl to the banquet. The young owner of the mansion accused Stephen of slave trading in commoners' children and underground gambling establishments. The Duchess asked the guards to remove the impudent guest from the estate. The Baron resisted. He considered himself the girl's only hope and did not believe that she could have partners. Duke Gordon dispelled the doubts of all those present. He was ready to accompany his wife to the banquet. The main character was surprised by her husband's appearance. She did not send him an invitation. Edward asked Stephen why he had already proposed to his wife if the divorce had not yet taken place. The frightened Baron only tried to laugh it off. While the men were sorting things out, Charlotte was studying the information. Tiffany's older brother realized that he was in a very awkward situation and tried to apologize to the hostess of the banquet. However, the girl was not going to forgive the impudent man. The main character told the guards that the Baron's basement contained children of commoners who were going to be sold to slave traders. The money was needed to pay off gambling debts. The Duchess declared Stephen guilty on behalf of the duchy's representative and ordered the guards to search his estate. The head of the estate, William, supported his daughter and agreed with her verdict. The owner of the mansion raised his glass and greeted those present. The day before the celebration, Charlotte met with her father. The girl told about what had happened in the estate in recent years and asked for help in exposing Tiffany. That is why the Duke supported his daughter. He saw that after her return, she was constantly engaged in family affairs and helped run the business. The tea was replaced with a new one. The young lady thanked her father for his support. Edward asked the hostess of the banquet and his wife to give him a dance. Charlotte tried to refuse, but to no avail. Tiffany already knew about her brother's shame and was going to take revenge on her stepdaughter. The maids were beaten for inaction, although they had absolutely no influence on the situation. Music began to play in the banquet hall. The first dance was announced, and Edward invited his wife. The attempt to refer to the father failed. The Duke twirled the beauty around the hall. The main character caught herself thinking that she was afraid of being carried away by Edward. The girl tried to remind her husband about the upcoming divorce. Suddenly, Tiffany appeared in the hall, apologizing for being late, and those present greeted the owner of the mansion. Charlotte thanked all the guests for taking the time to visit the estate. The young lady reminded that at today's celebration, she was representing the family, thereby confirming that she was going to live here, and the divorce would indeed take place. The girl suggested raising glasses to the head of the family. The father told everyone that he was glad that his daughter had returned to her home. William took a sip and felt sick. A moment later, the Duke fell unconscious. Tiffany ran towards her husband with a scream. The former maid blamed Charlotte for her father's death. The new Duchess said that she tried to believe the girl, although the maids reported to her about her stepdaughter's misdeeds and inappropriate behavior, and William's death only confirmed the stepmother's words. The main character humbly listened to all the accusations, because of which she was supposed to lose her status as an aristocrat. Edward watched his wife, waiting for her reaction to the events that were taking place. The girl agreed to lose her titles, along with the man who stole children from their mothers and used them as servants, pointing to Tiffany. The former maid was amazed by Charlotte's words. She finally remembered about the doctor. The arriving guards reported to the young mistress that they had freed the children from the dungeon in the Baron's estate. The tortured little prisoners looked at the well-fed people in expensive clothes. One of the maids recognized her son, whom her mistress had taken away from her, and she no longer hoped to meet him. The other maids also found their babies. The Duchess categorically denied any involvement in the kidnapping of children. The main character accused her stepmother not only of human trafficking, but also of attempting to poison members of her family and murdering her mother, the former owner of the mansion. One of the maids confirmed the girl's words. The maid said that her mistress constantly brewed tea for the head of the family with poisonous herbs, and the juice for Marcel also contained a toxin. Alcohol consumption against the background of constant poisoning of the body caused cardiac arrest. Tiffany denied the facts, accusing the employee of lying. The lady swung her arm to hit the servant who had revealed her secret. Someone grabbed the woman's arm from behind, and William's voice ordered her to finish the accusations. The new Duchess could not believe that Jones was alive. The Duke told those present that thanks to his daughter, he learned about the poisonous plant and prepared for poisoning in advance. The final failure for the treacherous maid was the appearance of Marcel. The young gentleman told what actually happened several years ago on the estate. Many years ago, William returned from a trip with a gift for his loved ones. He brought a basket of fragrant strawberries. Not finding his children and wife at home, the Duke went into the garden, the entrance to which was accessible only to members of the family, in the very center of which was the fairy tree, which for many generations protected the family. Hearing strange sounds, William ran to the park. The head of the family saw Tiffany, who was carrying Marcel, who was unconscious, in her arms. The maid reported that little Charlotte had broken a branch of the fairy tree, which began to collapse. Elizabeth handed over her son to the servant and ordered her to run away. William went further into the garden and found his wife dead, with his daughter sitting next to her, who remembered nothing at all. The ancient tree did not allow anyone to come near it anymore. For saving Marcel, Tiffany was later honored to become a duchess, and she continued to care for him as if he were her own son. However, the story of Charlotte's older brother turned out to be more interesting. In fact, Tiffany didn't save anyone. The personal maid of the mistress of the estate was going to kill everyone, including her own Elizabeth. She caught Marcel and dragged him to the fairy tree, since threatening the life of a family member opens access to the family heirloom. Tiffany was going to finish off the mistress first. The poor Duchess did not understand what was happening. She was expecting her third child. The woman said that she was constantly envious of her owner. It was truly an ideal loving family, and the mansion was always filled with joy and a warm atmosphere. Tiffany really wanted to destroy the world of happiness that she never had. She had long prepared a magic scroll for her plans. Elizabeth begged the woman to spare the children. The maid promised to kill the mistress, then put Marcel to sleep and deal with Charlotte, for whom she had not yet come up with a punishment. That was all William's eldest son remembered about that terrible day. Tiffany tried to deny the boy's words. Marcel continued his accusations. Now the new Duchess was trying to poison him and his father, constantly using poison and framing Charlotte. The brother and sister were happy to meet. They hadn't seen each other for so long. Edward watched from afar. The Duke expected a trick and immediately noticed a new scroll in Tiffany's hands, with which she was going to kill her hated stepdaughter. Charlotte's husband did not wait for the evil woman to fulfill her intentions and destroyed the magical object. Edward was glad to protect his wife, to whom he had been legally married until now. The guards were nearby, and they happily carried out the Duke's order. Tiffany was captured by the knights and faced with many charges. For serious crimes, the woman faced the death penalty. For saving her family, the main character received a special reward. She was given infinite energy for a day. The time had come when the whole Jones estate could enjoy life again, although it was impossible to bring Elizabeth back. On the instructions of her mistress, Emma did not enter her apartment for the whole day. The next day, Charlotte's entire room was strewn with red roses. In the center of the sea of flowers sat a young duchess. The lady asked the maid to send all the beauty to the specified address of her business partner. Left alone, the main character fell onto the sofa from fatigue. The effect of unlimited energy ended. It was impossible to spend it on anything other than conjuring roses. This gave Charlotte the opportunity to make money. The girl became thoughtful. During the day, she had completely forgotten about her little assistant. Miranda was also very tired after the previous events in the mansion and slept, restoring her strength. The fairy opened her eyes with difficulty and said goodbye to her mistress for a while. She needed to return to the magic tree for a while to replenish her energy. The little girl with wings was very happy that she had won the Duchess's trust. The main character thanked her friend for her help. A knock on the door interrupted the girl's embrace. The maids entered the room with their rescued children. The workers thanked the lady for the return of their sons and daughters and asked to let them go home. Charlotte did not understand the maids' decision. Because they needed to earn money to feed their families, she greeted the son of one of them. The baby smiled happily. He was very scared when he was taken away from his mother and put in the dungeon. The main character understood what fate awaited the boy. But suddenly she remembered about one slave. Janice also ended up in gladiatorial combat after being sold into slavery as a child. In the novel, the main character had to save a young man from brutal beatings and humiliation. According to the book, Kate and the former gladiator were happy together and got married. As Charlotte talked to the boy, she thought about the torment and pain that the wrestler had constantly experienced over the years. Upon descending into the dungeon, slave trader Ray discovered that his slave had broken the chain in his cage, intending to escape. Janice was covered in blood and bruises from his owner's constant beatings. Despite the fact that the gladiator was again handcuffed, he tried to attack his main enemy, who had deprived him of his freedom and name. The length of the chains prevented the young man from reaching the villain. Ray decided to punish the rebellious fighter and took a whip, beating him, as he had done many times before. After some time, a guest appeared in the gladiator's dungeon. The owner of the slaves was surprised by the unexpected visit. The owner of the dungeon did not remember anyone being interested in his charges before. The stranger in the mask asked to look at the hero who defeated the giant Joe in battle. A bag of gold coins convinced the slave trader to help the guest. Ray counted the money with great satisfaction. Several underground levels were occupied by iron cages, some of which contained the skeletons of unfortunate prisoners. The stranger walked through the scary corridors in horror. Janice was on the very bottom floor. The floor was covered in blood. Even the gladiator's legs were chained. The main character took off her mask and looked into the young man's eyes. Janice was surprised and excitedly tore at the metal that restricted his movements. The freed hand quickly reached out to the girl. Fingers through the cage tried to grab the guest. Charlotte managed to break free in time and jumped to the side. The Duchess did not understand why the young man behaved aggressively. Janice's gaze resembled that of a wild animal. The main character thought about it, assuming that the gladiator had been given some kind of potion and that it would not be easy to deal with him. The events of her past life came flooding back to Roxy. She really didn't like rain. That was exactly the kind of weather that happened then. The downpour didn't stop for several days. The girl looked at the wet floor. The ceiling had been leaking for a long time. There was no money for repairs. Realizing that she couldn't change the situation, the main character tried to calm herself down. She had to live on, although she no longer saw the point in it. Now Charlotte decided not to give up. She knew exactly why she came to the dungeon. The Duchess understood that Janice was weak and would not be able to get out of the cage on his own. The main character remembered the plot of the book, but she could not leave the young man to wait for salvation and die. A few hours ago, Miranda, getting ready to go on holiday to the ancient family tree, gave her friend a surprise. The fairy gave Charlotte a magic flower. Rose possessed healing magic that could restore lost health. The girl understood that at present this bud could help the slave. The Duchess mentally asked the flower to heal Janice. Waves of magic enveloped the surprised young man. The slave closed his eyes from the bright light. After a few seconds, the fighter noticed that his wounds began to heal and then disappeared completely. The main character asked how the young man was feeling and what his real name was. Charlotte noticed that even the fighter's appearance had changed and said her name. Janice looked at the stranger with a conscious, kind look. Throughout his entire adult life, the slave traders and spectators around him called the gladiator a monster. He did not remember being called anything else. The girl reminded that the boy's name was Janice. Edward was working in the guild office when the butler reported that his wife had begun to frequent the dungeon where the gladiator fights were held, and that she was currently there as well. Without listening to his assistant, the Duke rushed to where his wife was supposed to be now, greatly fearing for her safety. The main character gave the gladiator an antidote to prevent the effect of the potion that turns a man into a beast. The young man no longer resisted Charlotte's requests or attacked her. The drink was very tasteless, which the slave did not like. To sweeten the bitter medicine, the girl handed the fighter a candy. The Duchess noticed that not only had her new acquaintance's wounds disappeared, but his look had also changed. Janice looked at his savior with beautiful blue eyes. The main character could not believe such a transformation. The young man calmly allowed his face and hair to be touched. Charlotte was an arm's length away from the gladiator. The girl recalled the affair and was especially embarrassed by the color of her interlocutor's eyes. A sharp shout frightened those present, and the guild master, who had suddenly appeared, managed to cover the aristocrat with his hand and prepared his sword to protect her from the monster. The main character was surprised by the appearance of a business partner. The owner of the organization warned the girl that the gladiator was very dangerous. Janice was very scared. He didn't understand what had happened. The young man's gaze once again gleamed with animal cruelty. The fighter gathered his strength and tried to break the chains again. The master was ready to fight the slave. Charlotte stood up to protect Janice, covering him with her body. The girl was outraged by the behavior of the mask's owner. The Duchess was upset that her new acquaintance had injured himself again while struggling with the metal shackles. Having calmed down a little, the main character decided to ask the master for help. The girl wanted to get the gladiator out of the cage. Janice sat quietly and watched the conversation carefully. The guild leader couldn't understand the purpose of Charlotte's request. The masked man knew the imprisoned slave as a cruel and merciless fighter. Charlotte revealed the secret of the young man, saying that he was the heir of the powerful Duke of Wilson, who had disappeared many years ago. The master heard this story, but could not believe the girl's words. The main character anxiously awaited the decision. Edward thought about it. He did not understand the goal that his wife was pursuing. He did not rule out that she wanted to receive a reward. The Duke himself intended to put an end to the existence of the gambling house in the future. However, Charlotte just wanted to help Janice and then get rid of the slave gladiatorial fights. The girl regretted that she had not decided to free the young man after the first meeting, relying on the unknown main character of the novel. All this time, the young man was constantly beaten and risked his life. Now the main character was ready to correct her mistake. Charlotte again asked her partner to help her. The guild master had no plan of action at all. However, the girl prepared herself and thought through the kidnapping options. Initially, the young lady wanted to get Janice out using the security service schedule. The sudden appearance of a partner changed the decision. As it turned out, the partner passed by the slave trader under the guise of an ordinary worker delivering food. After a while, Ray fell asleep. The guild leader calmed the guard down with his signature blow without any problems. Charlotte suggested going through underground corridors to freedom. The girl was surprised to see the slave trader already tied up. The secret paths were very dangerous. Janice went down first. At the last moment, the main character decided to stay for a few minutes. The masked stranger took her bag of coins from Ray. Charlotte walked down the wooden stairs into the dungeon. The steps turned out to be slippery, and the girl slid straight into Janice's arms. A dissatisfied Edward suggested that the conspirators go straight to the Wilson Duchy to hand the young man over to his father. The main character insisted on the men's return to the Information Guild office. The girl drew her partner's attention to the blue color of the former gladiator's eyes. This was the main distinguishing feature of the imperial family, although in nature there was a potion that temporarily changed the cornea. The owner of the organization could not remember anyone who matched the age of the young man. There was no information about the birth of the emperor's heirs and illegitimate children, the only exception being the resurrected crown prince. Charlotte suggested that her partner investigate before returning the boy to the family, reminding him of the need to add antidote to Janice, since the effect of the beast potion had not yet worn off. The girl said goodbye to her puzzled conspiratorial allies and went to her mansion, where her beloved family was waiting for her, not yet imagining what would happen next with her divorce and what events awaited her ahead.